As Winston Churchill once said, there's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that is fighting without them. My name is Ken Park. I've been an Army officer for about 26 years, and I've spent quite a bit of time working with our allies and partners in combined operations. So today, I'd like to share with you some of my experiences and reflections and attempt to offer some lessons learned from the scar tissues I've gained over the years working with our allies and partners. So while I'll be talking specifically about working with militaries of other nations, most of the challenges that I will discuss also apply to joint operations as well as interagency collaboration. Basically, in any situation where you are forced to work with people and organizations that are outside of your tribe. And I think this is an important topic and hopefully somewhat timely, especially for those who are not just in uniform, but also those who are in the defense industry. Because if there's one thing that we can be sure about for the next major war, it's the fact that we won't be fighting it alone. And a lot of people have been talking about large scale conflict coming up in the future. So almost every major war that US has fought, to include the Revolutionary War, we've fought with allies and partners. And historically, this has been the case going all the way back to the ancient times. And the reason is quite simple. We are stronger when we are with our friends and allies. However, history is littered with examples of combined operations gone wrong. Why? Because it's hard. Combined operation, to successfully pull it off, is very, very difficult. As Winston Churchill once said, there's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that is fighting without them. So why is combined operations so difficult? Well, first, before we get too deep into the discussion, I want to separate out the political nature of combined operations. And there's a whole separate discussion to be had about the politics behind alliances, national grand strategy, and international relations. But for this conversation, I'm going to conveniently separate that out and focus primarily on the military component at the operational and tactical levels. So from this perspective, this narrower scope of the topic, why is combined operations so frustratingly difficult? I call this the paradox of combined operations. Think of a triangle, and each corner you have combined, fast, and precise. So this paradox of combined operations is that you can only pick two. If you want something to be fast and precise, great, but don't expect it to be combined. If you want something combined and fast, say goodbye to any kind of precision or any level of accuracy. And if you want combined and precise, grab a coffee because it's going to take a hot minute. And this triangle of paradox isn't theoretical. It's what many of us have experienced firsthand. And this is especially the case in the Pacific, where there's no NATO-style command structure, no permanent multinational headquarters, just a patchwork of sovereign partners, all with different systems, doctrines, and agendas. And I also want to clarify, when I'm talking combined operations, I'm not just talking about carving up the battlefield and giving everyone a piece of the dirt. Instead, I'm talking about integrating one or more of the warfighting functions like command and control, intelligence, fires, maneuver, or sustainment. And this is an important distinction because as we look at multi-domain operations with battlefield effects that blur geographic boundaries, we are going to have to integrate our allies and partners into all aspects of our warfighting functions. Trying to segregate different nations into different separate areas would not only be ineffective, it would create seams and gaps that our adversaries will be able to exploit on the modern battlefield. So then going back to the triangle, really the root cause of the paradox of combined operations is our lack of interoperability. And there have been a lot of literature and discussions about interoperability, but basically it comes down to three buckets of interoperability challenges. First is technical interoperability, or the "can you hear me" problem. So can our radios talk to each other? Will my command and control network recognize your platforms? And overall, I think we've made improvements over the years, but we've also regressed in certain areas. Even in recent combined exercises, Units were swapping companies and platoons with partner nations so that they can track each other's locations. In other words, giving them some of your platforms so that you can see them on your command and control networks. The problem is that as we upgrade our equipment, they are not always backwards compatible, and they have proprietary technology that can't be shared with our allies and partners. In some cases, we've left our allies behind as we upgraded our equipment. Second bucket is procedural or doctrinal interoperability, or the will you talk to me problem. We may have radios that can talk to each other, but that doesn't mean we know how to call in for artillery or medevac on each other's systems. Every country's military has a set of operating procedures that will almost certainly be different from the others. In addition to these procedural differences, you also run into the differences in doctrine. My tactical definition of secure or defeat may be quite different from how our allies or partners interpret those military tasks. And on top of all of that, we also have different legal interpretations or political standards when it comes to concepts like hostile intent or rules of engagement. Third bucket is language and cultural interoperability, or the do you understand me problem. Language barrier is pretty self-explanatory. We've all experienced it. While a challenge, I think, though, that this may be one of the easier challenges we can overcome with evolving technology. And I'll talk more about that here in a second. But the second part of this is the cultural interoperability. Cultural interoperability, on the other hand, is one of the more wicked problems that we have. You say inshallah to any veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan and don't know exactly what I'm talking about. Inshallah roughly means God willing. Will you go out on a patrol with us? Inshallah. Can you establish a blocking position on this road? Inshallah. Are you going to have enough fuel and ammunition for this mission? Inshallah. I mean, it can be absolutely maddening working with some of our allies and partners. I also had some experiences working with the South Korean military officers, who, by the way, are like some of the most amazing staff officers I've worked with. I mean, they are the super staff officers, absolutely phenomenal professionals. But I remember on more than one occasion when I would be reviewing some slides for an upcoming brief, and I would point out what is clearly a typo with inaccurate information. But when I asked them to change and correct it, they would refuse. Even though he agrees that it's wrong, because the slides were already approved by his supervisor and he did not have the authority to make any changes, he would not correct it. So there are numerous other examples from different countries, different cultures, including the US. I mean, let's not forget or minimize the frictions that we create, the scar tissues that we leave behind on our allies and partners that have had to work with us. And if you ask, they'll give you a laundry list of challenges that they have working with the US. These are the interoperability challenges that make it difficult for any military operations to be combined, fast, and precise, or the 3 points of the triangle. And while I don't think it's possible to completely eliminate this paradox of combined operations, I would like to offer some solutions that can help mitigate or minimize the interoperability challenges and hopefully reduce some of the negative impacts from this paradox. So first, going back to that first bucket, when it comes to technical interoperability, this is where I think technological advancements should have the biggest impact. I say should because, as mentioned earlier, new technology doesn't simply mean better. When it comes to things like cryptology and cybersecurity, we may be safer and more secure, but interoperability may not necessarily improve. There are some new projects out there like Integrated Tactical Network, or ITN, Capability Set 25, Unified Network Operations, and Tactical ICAM, Project Convergence, and they're using zero trust principles that do not rely on network location, devices, or user. Rather, access decisions are identity-based, context-aware, and continuously verified to improve interoperability. But this requires continuous effort. ensuring that interoperability becomes central to adoption of new technology and not something that gets bolted on later down the line. In places like the Pacific, again, where we don't have a multinational security alliance like the NATO, it is absolutely critical that the US is able to serve as the hub where other allies and partners can connect from the different spokes to be able to not only communicate and talk to the US, but also with each other. Second, for procedural and doctrinal interoperability, I also see a huge opportunity for technology to play a big role here. It is almost impossible and certainly not sustainable to maintain procedural proficiency or doctrinal fluency for all the different countries that you may be working with. Well, impossible and unsustainable for a human being. But what if we brought in an AI system, one that can instantaneously translate from one set of military procedure to another? In other words, service members and units can operate using the same procedure they've been using within their own country, within their own military, like calling in artillery fire. This procedure is then converted to a different set of procedure or data that are used for the firing unit from another country. So the two different units do not have to change or understand each other's process. The information or the instructions are seamlessly converted so that the other side can receive and process. Same could work for doctrinal differences. I'm not talking just about a translator, but an AI system that understands what our tactical term secure or defeat means and translates into a word or a term that other militaries can understand using their own unique tactical terms. And then finally, we have the language and cultural interoperability. For language, I think we're really close. I mean, the technology is already there, and I'm confident that we will be seeing some kind of universal military translator here really soon. To be precise, though, I'm not talking about a translator that can help you carry on a complex discussion about the meaning of life. I mean, we're just talking about an AI system specifically trained to help communicate within the military context. And this can happen right now. And again, while I have not seen it in use, I've heard of systems from OneBrief and other companies like Exia Labs that are beginning to incorporate this capability into their planning software. Cultural interoperability, on the other hand, this is hard, and there's just not an effective software or technological solution for this problem. Perhaps there will be some kind of AI system in the future, but for right now, I just don't see a computer algorithm that can truly understand and interpret the culturally inconsistent and illogical behavior of human beings. However, that doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. From my experience and observations, the best way to mitigate the effects of culture in decision making, especially in time-sensitive scenarios, is to remove it altogether. And yes, this is possible, I think, in certain situations. The development of Crisis Action SOP, or KSOP, at the Combined Forces Command in Korea serves as a good example. KSOP is a predetermined series of decisions and actions that both South Korean military and the U.S. executes during times of crisis based on enemy indicators and warnings. It's basically a playbook, and it is effective because, number one, it's binding. When the decision is made to execute a certain action, there is no negotiating about who, what, when, where. The fragos are pre-drafted and ready to disseminate. Second reason why I think it's effective is because you've given both sides the opportunity to work through their internal systems and processes. Drag it through the messy cultural component, but do it in advance so that when it's time to execute, you're just executing. In other words, you're not removing the cultural impacts. You're just getting them out of the way early. I know this isn't always possible in all scenarios, but with all the combined exercises that we conduct with various countries every year, we should be able to put together a playbook for each with some basic plays that we can execute quickly in times of crisis. Again, it's not the solution, but a method that can help. I do want to address one other method, a method I just don't think work well in terms of cultural interoperability. For the longest time, we've been taught that relationship is the most valuable commodity when working with our allies and partners. I disagree. And I know that's somewhat controversial stance, especially coming out of global war and terrorism, where we were indoctrinated on the importance of relationships. And I'll be honest, I drank the Kool-Aid, and I like to think that I became pretty good at building relationships. Just like all the other commanders that rotated in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan year after year. But now that we've lost Afghanistan and Iraq is essentially lost to Shia militia influence, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and reassess honestly and professionally about our failures. Now, let me be clear. Good relationship is important, maybe even necessary in certain cases, but insufficient to overcome cultural interoperability and improve combined operations. To explain this further, I'll just point out the simple fact that if we are suddenly dragged into a large-scale war, we're just not going to have the opportunity to conduct team-building events. We're not going to be able to go hiking together, or have dinner and drink together and become friends. And people may argue, well, that's why you build up these relationships early during exercises, which, okay, it's a fair point, but what are the chances that that captain you drank soju with and built a great relationship will be there to work with you in the future? Who's to say that you will even be the one that will be coming back? The reality is that we have military units with regional focus, but the people in those units are constantly rotating in and out. USFK, or U.S. Forces Korea, has been on the Korean Peninsula for over 70 years, but majority of the service members simply come and go after 1 or 2 years. The people are not regionally focused. Again, I'm not saying personal relationships are not important, and I think in certain strategic cases, like high-ranking political leaders or multi-star general officers, there's definitely something to be said about good social relationships. But the way we overemphasize it, especially at the lower operational and tactical levels, is just not helpful. What you need at these lower echelons isn't necessarily positive personal relationships, but predictability. You need to know how your counterparts are going to behave or respond in different situations. I used to work for a very difficult boss, and no one liked him. And I think the feeling was mutual. He didn't like us either. But he was just completely transparent, which made him very predictable. We knew what he wanted and how he wanted it. So as a team, we were actually quite effective. I also had a boss that I absolutely loved, would have low crawled over a concertina wire for this man, but we did not enjoy working for him. You never knew what he wanted. You would produce a product that you thought he wanted, and he would make you do it again with different set of guidance. We all enjoyed drinking and hanging out with him, but we were not an effective team. I've also had officers working for me who were always one taco short of a combo plate. You know the ones I'm talking about. To me, though, that was okay. They were predictably incompetent, and I could always find places to employ them where they would do the least damage. Bottom line is that in combat at the tactical level, where you don't get to choose who's on your team, you at least want transparency because that provides predictability. In combined operations, you want to know the capabilities of those foreign forces. What can they do? What can they not do? Where will they succeed? And can I rely on them for a certain mission? Or should I start developing contingency operations? You don't have to set the bar too high when it comes to combined operations. I mean, it is hard enough as it is. If everyone just shows up at the right place at the right time through the fog of war, I think that's success. So let me conclude with a cautionary tale from the Charge of the Light Brigade. Some of you may be familiar with this event, made famous by Lord Tennyson's poem of the same title. During the Crimean War, a coalition of Britain, France, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia were fighting to stop the expansion of the Russian Empire. At Balaclava in 1854, a vague order led 600 British light cavalrymen to charge directly into Russian artillery. Nearly half were killed or wounded. The French general Pierre Basquet, who was there observing and also trying but failing to stop the charge, reportedly said, "It is magnificent, but it is not war. It is madness." And Tennyson wrote, "There's not to reason why. There's but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Someone had blundered." It wasn't courage that failed that day. It was lack of interoperability that failed combined operations. One of many examples from the history books. Lord Raglan, the British commander of the expedition, wanted it fast and combined, so he didn't have precision, which led to the Light Brigade charging towards the wrong enemy line. With where we are with technology, it doesn't have to be this way anymore, but we have to invest our time, energy, and resources in the right places. Paradox of combined operations will endure, but the effects can be mitigated. Thank you.